Officials say 388 people are still unaccounted for in the wake of the deadly wildfires on the island of Maui. As of Thursday afternoon, Maui County said overall more than 1,700 people who were initially reported missing had been found safe and well. The death toll from the blazes currently stands at 115.
Joining us now to discuss the untold political forces at hand for the deadly fires is former Hawaii State Representative and the National Director of the Green New Deal Network, Kaniela Ng. Welcome to Rising.
Thanks for having me, Jessica.
So let's get into a little bit of these failures. We've been hearing a lot about the sirens that were supposed to go off. And of course, there's a lot to blame. The colonial government of Hawaii has not been treating the land there on the island very well for many, many years. And we know that there are people to blame, specifically big oil, for the climate crisis. Can you just get into a little bit of the political failures, in recent days and months, and then the longer term?
Sure. This disaster is anything but natural. It was caused by the neglect by our utility, Hawaiian Electric. You'll be hard pressed to find another county with $1.4 million median homes without buried power lines, let alone ill-maintained lines to the point where 60 miles per hour wind will just blow them over. It was also caused by the colonial diversion of public streams from the largest corporations that stem all the way back to the 20th century. Some of the first oligarchs in Hawaii continue on. And it was lastly caused by the pollution that overheated our planet and made these hurricanes more severe. So this could happen anywhere. This isn't just an issue in Hawaii. These incentives for land grabbers and utility neglect persist anywhere with a private model of energy management.
Kaniela, I want you to talk to us a little bit about how this has impacted you, your family, people that you know, because there is a human component of this, and oftentimes we do dive straight into the politics and who's responsible and who should have did what, and I do understand why we do that, but real people's lives have been impacted.
Yeah. I think if anyone on Maui, if you're from Maui, you've lost friends or family or neighbors. It's heavy times, but, I'm an organizer, which means at moments like this, where you have the county suing the utility and the state blaming the county, there's a misalignment of power where we can actually make a difference. So no matter how hot the water is, when the wave crests, you got to paddle the hardest. So at some point, I'm going to have to really just grieve. And a lot of us just don't have that luxury right now because as we're trying to heal, there's land grabbers and disaster capitalists hovering above the carnage like vultures, preying upon families in their darkest hour who have just lost everything. So yes, we're going through a lot, but the other side isn't giving us that room. There's already realtors making calls to families. There's already, private equity firms meeting with government, trying to see how they can build giant high rises and push out the Kanaka Maoli Native Hawaiians living in Lahaina. So unfortunately, we got to figure out a way to do both.
There's a really strange talking point in my perspective that saying the $700 that came from FEMA is not enough is a right-wing talking point, and that FEMA gave as much as they could. But I think a lot of us expect more from the federal government in support of Hawaii and rebuilding Maui. So what would you say folks in Hawaii are expecting from the federal government? There's a lot of sources for rebuilding funding-wise after natural disasters. HUD, for example, gave a lot of money after Hurricane Sandy. I think FEMA only gave 44 million of the 150 million plus after Hurricane Sandy to rebuild. So can you just say more about what you would expect from the federal government?
Sure. The state actually took 2 days after the fire broke to even request an emergency declaration. So FEMA couldn't act before that. As soon as it was requested, President Biden signed a request in a matter of hours. And the issue is Hawaii is 6,000 miles away from DC. There's no state that next door where people can just bring personnel over. You got to travel quite far, so there's that delay. I think the comms there's like a communications issue by saying $700 went out to families. Like that's as much as you can do immediately. But there was also aid where they're subsidizing hotel rooms, Airbnbs, and accessory dwelling units to house survivors. At this point, there are around 20,000 hot meals that's being delivered through the Red Cross. But this isn't enough. Especially these short-term housing solutions like Airbnb subsidies only last for 3 weeks. Where are people supposed to go after that? There are still families sleeping on gym floors and in tents, and our island is forced to make an impossible choice uh, because most of our economy relies on tourism. A lot of people are asking tourists to keep coming, but on the other hand, we need the hotel rooms. So the federal government right now, the most urgent thing they can do is give us those PPE loans, like what happened in COVID, where we demonstrated that we can put a pause on the economy and really focus on needs of people, and actually give forgivable small business loans and direct assistance to workers island wide.
Yeah, Kaniela, I'm originally from New Orleans, and I remember during Hurricane Katrina, HUD, for example, used a CBDG, Community Development Block Grants, in order to help small businesses get by. They also made individual payments to people who were really struggling. For our viewers who are watching the program, though, all of our hearts go out to the people of Maui. I'm praying for you guys after knowing what that experience can do to families, let alone young children. What can individuals do to help people make it through this storm?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, so where government and large institutions are not being optimized. There are leaders in the community, especially Kanaka Maoli, who have banded together. Nauhana Olele is demanding that Josh Green pause redevelopment, reinstate the government transparency law that was paused, the Sunshine Law, and make sure we're centering the community in the redevelopment process. We know that like direct aid is flowing. Charities have raised millions of dollars. We're directing folks to support families with Venmo. We have, if you go to like Lahaina Venmo, if you Google that, you'll find it. But I think what people don't understand often is down the line is when disaster capitalists really, really strike months or even years later, in the form of regulatory, legislative, and political fights. And then from my experience at Green New Deal Network, that's often when we get blindsided. So what we need to be building right now is political power and community power, where when we're going door to door to wellness checks, it's not just FEMA who leave in 2 months, it's neighbor to neighbor. We're building power together. So a year down the line, we might have 200 people repairing a school, and the next day testifying at city council. We know we need to be electing people that won't center private equity firms like BlackRock in the rebuilding process, but actually build a master plan from the ground up. So that's going to take a certain kind of effort that most charities can't do. So that's why the most rooted funds in the community banded together and created the Maui Recovery Fund.org, to make sure we have an eye on the long run, because it's going to take $6 billion to repair. So no, that money is going to have to come from government. So we got to make sure we position our people to get it.
How do you think a lot of this disaster response has been complicated by a lot of the representatives in government not being Indigenous Hawaiians, not being people who are from Maui or a lot of the towns that have been affected by the fire?
Yeah, I mean, even folks that have been like Native Hawaiian leaders who are generally been on like the corporate side of things and less responsive to the community are banding together just based on shared values, and are showing up in ways that are a lot more rooted than folks would expect. So I think it does make a difference. Where you come from shapes who you are. So if you grew up in somewhere that Hawaii is only seen as a playground and a tourist destination, you're going to have a different outlook. That said, identity politics isn't the cause of this. It's more of like the incentives and the corruption that's been plaguing our islands for generations now. If HECO was more responsive and didn't buy out the Public Utility Commission, they would have maintained the power lines. That would have prevented this. If Alexander and Baldwin didn't divert the water that made Lahaina a tinderbox, it wouldn't have burned. And of course, if the polluters didn't overheat our planet, uh, like any of these factors would have prevented it. So, most folks in Lahaina understand that you can't just blame people, you have to blame the systems. And that if we're going to prevent this in the future from happening anywhere, because anywhere you can wake up and your kid's school, your church, your grocery store could be in the ground, flattened into ashes. Like that's the urgency we're operating under. And we're going to have to weed out, follow the money in politics and build a force that's greater than that corruption that we face today.
So, when the cameras go away, you guys will still have to grieve. The recovery process will take years, as I know from my own experience, seeing my own family back in New Orleans. How important is it for local leaders, for federal leaders to understand that Native Hawaiians have to be a part of this rebuilding process? They have to have equity stake. You got to sort of hire small business owners to help rebuild some of those schools that you used in your earlier example. How important is it for people to understand that bringing in someone like a BlackRock or some other large corporation isn't a part of the solution?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a tension behind like the speed of which we need to recover and like who's centered in that process. And there's like a false myth that the only way to move fast is to do it the wrong way. But there are, like, I was talking to survivors just last week. I've convened a meeting and facilitated a meeting with all the Kanaka Maoli leaders in Lahaina, and not just Native Hawaiians, but just anyone who holds a place dear and really makes it what it is. And they have brilliant ideas already. Like the Department of Hawaiian Homelands is funded in full for the first time ever since 1920 at $600 million. So the state could, if we have enough trust with the state officials, they could buy a good chunk of Lahaina and build it just to house Native Hawaiians who are overrepresented in the unsheltered population here. There's talks about working with land trust to put some land aside to restore Lahaina to what it once was, a lush wetland. And it's not, we're not saying to center Native Hawaiians because we're the first and worst hit by climate disasters like these. Like that is a component, there's a moral component, but just in a practical sense, if we go back to the status quo, this is going to keep happening, not just in Hawaii, but anywhere. So, these are people that understand how to create a society that doesn't lead to ecological collapse and climate doom. So just as a practical matter, it makes sense that we tap into their expertise rather than push them off their ancestral lands.
I think this has been a real example of how working class people are super vulnerable to natural disasters. We've had, the GOP debates Wednesday night where they asked the question if they believe climate change is real, if it's man-made. Can you speak a little bit to how this is an example of how a lot of natural disasters will go if we don't do something to address climate change?
Sure. And you would think that as these disasters become more common, people will just wake up. Like that was all the hope, right? For those of us who are in the climate movement would be like, oh, things are gonna get worse and people are gonna wake up. But we're really at least one half of the American political establishment, the GOP, are just boiling frogs at this point. And I think it's up to all of us that there are millions of people, according to that Yale study, who are alarmed about climate change, and if asked by a trusted messenger, would do anything really, like even get arrested. But they're just not being asked. They don't understand really what to do. Paper straws and paper bags will no longer cut it. So, I tell folks if they're wondering what they can do as an individual, it's to take political action and build community. Not just vote, but call and write your elected officials, protest, testify, go door to door in your community with an organization. If the Greenwood Network has a good list of them, we have hundreds across the nation. We need to understand that only government can end fossil fuels. We need to invest $1 trillion a year to accelerate clean energy, deny fossil fuel permits, and call a climate emergency. And to do that, we need to be a force greater than fossil fuels because, the reason why, the reason why the Republicans are saying this is because they're bought out by the fossil fuel industry. That's big oil, big coal. So we need to become unignorable to the point where we're more powerful than those who pollute, are who those who pollute us to the point where we're dying.
As we get ready to wrap here, it took President Biden 13 days to get to Hawaii. He faced a lot of criticism for that. If you could speak directly to the president right now, what would you say to him are the most urgent needs you need him to use the bully pulpit to make sure Hawaiians get what they need as soon as possible?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you came earlier, honestly, it might have distracted from the efforts that are happening on the ground. It was incredible to see the community come together the way we did in order to field and distribute donations, even when the federal government was lacking. That said, President Biden should give direct relief to workers, to small businesses, and medium term or longer term shelters, not just for 21 days in Airbnbs. They should demand that Airbnb give not just 500 units to survivors, but all 6,000 that's on Maui right now. He just do everything within his power. So there's going to be gaps in insurance claims that will create. I mean, like in New Orleans, like some of these folks that were in temporary shelters, those shelters became permanent. In Hurricane Sandy, it's been 10, 12 years that people still are without homes. So, pause foreclosures and mortgages and rents, maybe subsidize them, just do the right thing. Like right now, only the federal government has that kind of power and resources. And it'll be an investment that will pay off down the line because it's going to take a long time for our economy to repair. Yeah, he needs to do more still, and in the longer term, commit to something. I think so far in President Biden's reelection campaign, sure, it's more exciting, I think, for folks here than some of the GOP folks, but it might not be exciting enough for people to come out, people who voted for him before, because he's not saying anything that he's going to do in the future. He's only running on the Inflation Reduction Act and what was done in the first term, which people don't even know about. So tell us what you're going to do. Tell us how you're going to invest in our communities, how you're going to end this climate crisis, because you've been through this. Now I've been through this, and many more will. And we just don't want to wish this upon anybody else.
Kaniela, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with us and waking up very early to do it.
No,
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you.
Oh, boy.